today's topic is the third and final of the three-part series with the fabulous folks from the Content Advisory Group on how to make content marketing work for you. And if you've been in the first two sessions, you know this is really practical advice. We don't do the blah, blah. This is stuff you can really use in your daily work. And I'm super happy to introduce Robert Rose to you, who will take you through part 3, how to measure content marketing experiences. Now, I've known Robert for many, many years. He's doing a fantastic job in helping, big organizations to successfully transform their business's overall content marketing communication strategy. Kaiser Permanent, Facebook, Hilton, just to name a few. And on a personal note, he has helped me greatly as my mentor when I started out doing content marketing programs and strategy way too long ago. He's really some sort of content marketing activist and certainly the most passionate speaker on the topic I've seen on stage. I can hear you chuckle, Robert. And if you need any help getting your content marketing points across internally, I really do recommend giving Robert and Kathy and Tim a shout. Now, without further ado, Robert, the floor is yours.
Well, sure. And hi, how are you?
I am good. I'm super excited we're doing this, and I'm super excited we have so many people.
Well, I am super.
Your magic.
I am stoked to be here, and I am so happy that all of you have decided to join. I'm overwhelmed by the numbers, and I'm sure it's the topic. It is one of those things where content marketing and measurement is certainly a big topic and one that's quite popular right now. And let me just start off by hoping that all of you are out there safe, well, warm, and ensconced in your homes or some safe place where you're, getting on in these very weird times. So virtual hugs to all of you. As Sonia mentioned, we're the Content Advisory. We were born out of the Content Marketing Institute, and we do stuff. More importantly, to the point of what we want to talk about today is welcome to the third of what we have really enjoyed as a 3-part series here. And as Sonia mentioned, if you didn't get a chance to see one of the first 2 with Kathy or Tim, they're worth going back because we really see this as a, call it a tripod, call it a stool, whatever you want to call it. It's really 3 legs that support the strategy. Where the operating model really helps us develop into the right governance, the right framework for the approach of content marketing. And all of that is what enables us to measure these immersive experiences that we create. And that's what we're going to talk about today, obviously, is how do we start to think about measuring? Because in many cases, what we're doing is measuring exactly the wrong thing. What we've learned, and this is the way that Kathy teed up her discussion, and I think it's just an important way to tee up ours, is that content works, and perhaps even more now in this post-COVID world that we need to live in. It does work. As we pivot and we think about delivering value to customers, content itself, when it's treated as an asset to the business, works for those businesses. But it has to be treated as such. And the challenge, of course, and we'll get to that in just a moment, is that how do we scale and organize our efforts instead of just becoming an on-demand vending machine of content for the rest of the business and actually get strategic about it? Because the measurement and efficacy of what it is we're doing is hard to find sometimes. And one of the things that we have found is one of the easiest places to start is even just getting clarity of costs. So let's dive in and get to it because it's an important topic. The 2 most common questions I get asked, and I've been doing this now coming up on 12 years. I've been really focused in on the topic of content marketing and being passionate about it, as Sonia mentioned. And the 2 most common questions are, 1, how am I going to scale this, right? How am I, my name is Bill and this is my colleague, Margaret, and we're 2 people and we're in the business. And how do we actually scale this content marketing to meet all of the demands that the business has? And the second most common question, of course, is how do we measure success? Now, that's really has to do with mostly with measurement, obviously, but the success itself is really, how do we know if what we're doing is working? And where those two things meet is where I think is the most interesting question, because it actually brings up a third, which is really the heart of what we're trying to ask, which is, how much should we invest? In other words, content marketing isn't the only thing we're doing. It certainly shouldn't be the only thing we're doing. And if we're doing it well, it should be multiplying all of our efforts across all of the different things that we're doing, across sales enablement, across PR, across demand generation, across brand, across customer service even. So how much should we be investing in this team of Bill and Margaret and the rest of our colleagues to really figure this stuff out? That's the question that I think measurement really should answer at the end of the day. Now, here's the thing on scaling and measurement. The first is we have to recognize that scaling content is not a factory. Too many times I walk into businesses and I hear, hey, we're a content machine, we're a content factory. Content scaling is not the ability to add more capacity to do more of the same. This is where we run into that ceiling all of the time. Do more, do more, do more, do more. We turn it into a factory. And of course, we can't do more ultimately. I don't care how big your organization is. Ultimately, you're going to run into that ceiling. And quite frankly, it becomes less effective as you do so. Today, as we so understand from the idea of the different channels, the different formats, the different operating models that we have to work within, scaling is different. Scaling content is adaptive. That's what scalability really means. It is our ability to add new and different capabilities to what we want to do. In other words, when TikTok comes around and you want to start doing TikTok videos, well, that's a new and different capability. It may be a useless one, but quite frankly, it is a new and different capability. And that's what we're trying to get to when we're looking at scalability. How do we have the capacity to do new things? Because that's our strategy, right? We want to innovate. We want to differentiate. We want to do these new and different things. But that brings us to measurement. How do we know which new and different things we should be doing? Well, we want to measure those things. Now, maybe this is something you've heard before. It's a business, a sort of truism that gets thrown around quite a bit at conferences, by gurus, by all of that. And the quote goes something like this: what gets measured gets managed. And it again gets attributed to Peter Drucker, Deming, Lord Kelvin sometimes. And here's the thing, none of the three, and quite frankly, nobody who gets attributed to it actually said it. Nobody actually said this in its solo. The quote actually is more contextual than that. It actually comes from a paraphrasing of a guy by the name of V.F. Ridgway's paper that he wrote in the 1950s called Dysfunctional Consequences of Performance Measurements. And the actual quote is, what gets measured gets managed, even when it's pointless to measure and manage it. And even if it harms the purpose of the organization to do so. And this is true. We know this. We see this in business all the time when we think about measurement. We look at vanity metrics. We look at our ability to measure everything, and so we do. We measure clicks and views and downloads and tweets and the quantity of content. We measure all these things when we assign arbitrary numbers to them, and we think that that's now checked the box of actual measurement. And of course, it hasn't. Measurement is more than quantifying some arbitrary number to something. That number means nothing unless we actually put some actionable insight around it. An actual measurement strategy means deriving insight toward progress that we're making toward a goal. That's what we're trying to do, is show how close we are to measuring and meeting some particular shared purpose that we're trying to reach. That's the key. And that's what brings us to this. Because if we've understood our operating model and understand the true way that we can actually deliver content to the business that makes sense for the business, which is what you heard when Tim spoke, and then we can apply the right framework to approach that, whether it's centralized, decentralized, or some sort of governance workflow to that content. That's what Kathy spoke to. Now we can understand when we deliver these immersive experiences, what our purpose should be, our goal, our shared purpose, thus we can start to measure it. So that's where we're going to start. That's where we're going to really focus our efforts is, and how do we actually look at measurement across different categories? So let's get to it. When we think about audiences and immersive experiences to reach a purpose, a shared purpose, the way we look at it is across what we call the 5 C's of audience investment. Now, if any of you have heard me speak before, you know I'm a sucker for alliteration. So if you don't like the names of these categories, please come up with your own. But they're just easy to remember, and they are ways for us to actually categorize the different ways that we get to that shared purpose. And so let's go through each of these quickly, because I think what you'll see is that they start to align with a shared purpose and focus that's very specific. And so we start where we always start, which is where our customer journey is, right? So you've seen this before. The figure 8, the infinity loop of the buyer's journey. We certainly didn't invent this. I think it's a pretty good way to represent the current and today's customer journey. It also fits on a 16:9 slide, which is also very convenient. But of course, it starts with our brand experience in the very beginning, where we're trying to learn and understand what audiences are doing. That circles back around over to a mid-campaign or a lead experience, where we're trying to generate high-level leads, mid-funnel leads, low-level leads, qualified leads, MQLs, SQLs, whatever your particular metaphor of business is. Once they then contract with us or become a customer, now we start developing loyalty experiences and ultimately circling back around to evangelizing or trying to share our brand with others, or back around to buying more stuff from us, etc. So the infinity loop. What we've seen in measurement is if we apply the two, and there really are only 2 functional shared purposes that we can get to in a business, they sort of begin to align with this buyer's journey. So we say, okay, great. The only thing we can really shoot for are 1, more revenue, or 2, savings of money. In other words, we're going to make the company more money, or we're going to help the company save money. Hopefully, we're attempting to do both. And when we do that, we can do that in direct and indirect ways. So we can create direct revenue, direct savings, and indirect revenue. Now, what we've seen, and again, this is, I don't want to be too, sort of only a Sith deals in absolutes. Remember that. So not too absolutism here. But generally speaking, what we see is when we're developing these immersive experiences, we can start to look at these quadrants as the way of thinking about where we might first identify a shared purpose or opportunity. In other words, when we look at developing brand experiences, we're looking kind of at developing indirect savings. Lead experiences are probably direct savings, helping marketing do things better. Loyalty experience is probably indirect revenue, in other words, teaching customers to be better customers. And direct revenue on evangelizing experiences, can we actually charge money or develop content products? So what we've done is we've taken those 5 categories and then laid them in here. So it starts with kind of a meta one. This is the 5th one, if you will, which is contribution. This is Bill and Margaret, right, sort of trying to drive more content into the business. This is Bill and Margaret merchandising content because sales demands more content. Demand generation wants more content. The CEO, the CMO, the CFO wants their speeches done. PR needs content. We are contributing content assets into the business. So it may be anywhere, but we're measured by that, by our contribution to the business, not necessarily by how that content performs. We'll talk about that in just a moment a little bit deeper. Competency goals, right? So when we look at competency goals, again, toward the beginning of the journey, we're looking at how does content make us smarter in order to deliver a broader, bigger, more in-depth brand around the audiences we're trying to drive value to. Then we look at campaign goals. Campaign goals can help us understand how to make marketing better SEO, better campaigns, more leads, the Glengarry leads, if you will. Loyalty experiences across the customer, teaching our customers to be more loyal, more evangelistic around us, to stay longer, to churn out less, teaching customers to be better customers. And then finally, the cash goal, maybe a bridge too far for many of you, but we can certainly look at cash as a method of how we actually drive value. All right, so let's look at each of these in turn just to give them a bit more context. So contribution of goals. One of the biggest mistakes I see made in an early content marketing program is where the content team is responsible for producing content to the rest of the business. In other words, we produce infographics and blog posts and white papers and all these different assets to the business. And the content is then measured by how well we promoted that piece of content. I see it all the time. We spend good money on a white paper. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's provocative, it's inspiring. It actually really teaches people how to change. And then a demand gen person takes that white paper and puts a really crappy social media campaign behind it or a promotional campaign behind it, and the campaign fails. And what do we blame? Well, we don't blame the campaign. We start going, it wasn't a great white paper. No, that may or may not be true. We need to start measuring ourselves by the contribution of that content. That's where we're measuring our ability to produce it as a contributing factor into the business. So how do you do that? Quantity of content consumed by internal customers. That's a perfectly reasonable measure for that type of goal. Efficiency in content creation across the entire operation. One of my favorite methods of this, quite frankly, I talked to a CFO a couple of months ago where the CFO said, I don't really understand the whole content team's purpose. And I said, tell me how much you spent last year on content. And he kind of laughed at me and said, I don't really know what you mean by that. And I said, exactly. Content is one of the things that you produce more of than anything, but you don't know how to measure it because you don't know how much you're spending on it. What if we created a strategy by the production of assets through the right operating model that gave you scalability, the ability to structure what an ebook means in Europe versus what an ebook means in the US, how much you're spending on it versus freelancers versus internally versus with agencies, and gave you that clarity of cost for a contribution to the business. Would that be valuable? And the CFO says, of course it would. What is the contribution toward the effectiveness that we're trying to make? That's a contribution goal. How about a campaign goal? Well, of course, this is where we like to start in marketing. More, faster leads, better SEO, better organic traffic, decreasing our cost per visitor costs, increasing efficiencies. This is a wonderful one, of course. Great example of this is what our friends at Monster.com are doing. I think they've got one of the most amazing content marketing programs right now through their publication called their Career Advice Center. Their Career Advice Center is a separate publication built to build an audience, and they're achieving two goals. Because an important thing to remember here is that these goals, as you go through them, should build upon each other. You're not just trying to reach one, you're trying to reach multiples of these if you can. So from a contribution goal standpoint, because they're creating original content for the publication called Career Advice Center, well, they're doing original research and getting data and all of that. That's helping their PR people get better coverage in magazines like Fast Company and Entrepreneur. They're contributing better information and stories and content to PR to help PR become a better, more effective organization. But a campaign goal is also reached. 20% of all their organic traffic now comes through this platform. And that's nice. And you go, yay, wonderful. They're a nice SEO case study for somebody. But that organic traffic now results in 4 million job searches. And of course, job searches is one of their main currencies to their other constituency, which of course is the people advertising jobs on their platform. But even more importantly is that those 20% of traffic results in a much higher conversion rate than their paid traffic, 48,000 new members. And when they estimate how much they would have had to have paid in paid media to get those 48,000 new members, they estimated that they would have paid $3 million of paid media to get those. Did they spend $3 million to launch Career Advice Center and to maintain it? No. The difference there is the value. That is the campaign value of this particular audience. Let's look at competency goals. Maybe it's media buy effectiveness by use of first-party data. Any of you concerned with GDPR or CCPA or any of those sort of new regulations, we need to lean into content marketing and creating that value for the customer, because that's not only within the scope of GDPR and CCPA, it's within the spirit as well. Delivering opt-in value to those consumers and then using that first party to, quite frankly, be better at delivering more personalized experiences. Marketing data improvement, qualitative information, polls, surveys, buying intention. I asked a CFO one time, I said, tell me about your marketing database. Well, we have 25,000 people in there. Is it just email addresses? Mickey Mouse at gmail.com and give me the white paper at gmail.com. By the way, that's me. If you see me in your database, I will be give me the damn white paper at gmail.com. Or decreased research costs or different products or regional strategies for new markets, making us smarter as a business by using and leveraging the audience insight that we get. Great example of this is our friends at Frontline. They're a software company, and they launched a new platform that they call Frontline Research and Learning Institute. And basically what their software does is it teaches school employees, basically operational people, how to operate schools and educational operations better. And what they did was they created this institution to do original research and teach these operational people how to run schools better. Now, from a contribution standpoint, this new audience platform, by the way, is the spearhead of their new rebrand, new logo, new identity, new everything that they're doing. From a campaign perspective, 32% of their new leads now come through this platform. From a competency standpoint, they now understand their buyers' needs because they understand the consumption of content. What issues are really important to these people? What data is most resonating with these people? And quite frankly, it has helped their other direct communications, email marketing in this case for sales, which got them a 195% increase in their click-to-open rates for their sales-oriented emails because they're including this stuff that really resonates. It's helping the entire business through this measured audience. How about a customer goal? Higher retention, less churn. What's the gap between audiences and non-subscribing audiences? Better word of mouth. Do audiences tend to share or say nicer things about us over time? What's our net promoter score? Is it going up because of content? One of my favorite examples of customer value in an audience is perhaps one of the most famous examples of content marketing out there. We often talk about John Deere and the furrow as being this wonderful sort of patient zero, if you will, of content marketing. 130 years ago, they started the print magazine. But like any modern business, they have now launched the digital version of the furrow and have for some number of years. There are 7 different versions of the furrow, by the way, digitally, that actually go to different audiences, big agriculture, small agriculture. They even have a magazine dedicated to guys like me who like to ride around on, small little tractors and mow the lawn and stuff like that. So how are they doing? We like to think of the furrow as a brand magazine, maybe top of the funnel. It's not. It is definitely a customer-oriented publication. How? Well, from a contribution, it's a dealer program. It actually helps their dealers. The only way you can get subscribed to the furrow is you go through your dealer where you bought your tractor. And that's a wonderful way for what? Dealers to actually build their email lists. So it's contributing to them and their abilities to do better marketing. From a campaign, it's helping those dealers drive new repair and cross-sell leads for those dealers, helping them build their email list so that they're actually doing better cross-sell and upsell. From a competency perspective, they use that data to understand regional and buyer persona differences for all that research that they can do what? Deliver back to dealers and say, hey, by the way, people in Idaho are acting different than people in Montana. From a customer perspective, it is their best dealer relations program. It is continuously named by both customers as well as dealers as one of the most valuable programs that they deliver from a customer service standpoint. So customer value. And then finally, cash, revenue opportunities. And again, maybe a bridge too far for some of you out there, but can you ask for revenue for your content? Is it that good? Marketing programs that actually pay for themselves? My friend Joe Pulizzi and I wrote a whole book on this category called Killing Marketing, which is how very leading and forward-leaning companies are actually transforming their marketing, in this case, to profit centers. Maybe my favorite example of this over the last few years is what Terminus, the small startup account-based marketing company, is doing. They're meeting every one of the goal categories. When they first started their business, the account-based marketing business, they started a content brand called Flip My Funnel, which was basically at that point just a blog. And they started this blog called the Flip My Funnel blog, and then they launched a podcast to go along with it, and then they launched an event. And the event was what sort of turned and tipped the scales. From a contribution perspective, They're establishing the clarity of their early brand of Terminus and helping the people understand what account-based marketing was really doing and why their brand was best at it. From a campaign perspective, they had 600 customers show up to these events, their wonderful customer events, and prospects attended as well. They got 100 new customers from the 2 years the event and when we actually looked at this. From a competency perspective, they're getting competitive insight because guess what? They invite their competitors to come and actually display a booth at this event, who are, by the way, paying for the privilege to do that. And from a customer perspective, it is a customer loyalty event, so they're helping their customers become smarter and better about the use of their product by teaching them how to do account-based marketing in a better way. And ultimately, it's a cash. It pays for itself. The event was paid for by sponsors and the attendees. They got $1.5 million. And the most incredibly cool thing that I think is neat is that investors have come in and said, we want to invest, yes, in Terminus, but we really want to invest in this Flip My Funnel content brand. They've now divested the company into two halves, which is the Terminus software company and the Flip My Funnel company. The key with all of these is that audiences themselves are compound investments. The value of an audience is in direct proportion with both the number and the depth of business goals that it supports. So we have to figure out what the business goals are, because then the audience becomes utility as a corporate asset, more and more valuable over time. So how do we do that? Well, we have an approach. And again, this is just our approach. We hope that it's useful for you to develop those goals. When we think about goals, we think of them in what we call the measurement pyramid. It's an inverted pyramid, and of course, it starts with a goal. What investment value do we want out of our audience in the early days, in the midterm days, and in the long term? That will then help us deliver KPIs, which help us inform our progress toward meeting those goals. And we call those audience value indicators. Now, we can then associate metrics, all the things that we need to measure to help us improve our process toward meeting those KPIs, which helps us give insight toward how we're progressing toward our goal. Here's an example. So maybe we have a campaign goal, and that campaign goal is by the end of the first year, I want my new blog, my new resource center to be 10% of our leads. Now we can monetize that goal very simply because we know what the cost per lead is. So if we say 10% of all the leads, maybe that value is $150,000 to the business. Great. Now we have a very clear, very monetizable goal. What are the KPIs that need to meet that goal? Well, we need to know our number of visitors. We're going to need to know our monthly overall lead count, obviously. We're going to need to know our rates by campaign, what our A-level subscribers are versus B, C, and D-level subscribers. In other words, are we just getting tire kickers, or are we getting good MQLs into the business? We need to know the engagement rates. All of those are KPIs to help us understand how we're managing our progress toward that campaign goal. And then we'll have metrics, of course, that we look at every day. The likes, the followers, the shares of content, the traffic, the time on the site, all the things that help us improve those KPIs. That's a measurement pyramid. Boom. Now we have a very discrete set of measurements that we're measuring toward one goal. One measurement pyramid per goal. Here's another one from a contribution standpoint. And this is an actual one that we did for a client. We said, we're trying for a 25% reduction in content creation production costs in 1 year. That would have a value of $200,000 that we could either put into other programs or, quite frankly, just save the money. So the KPIs there, well, what is the internal content consumption quantity? What are the number of agencies that we need to engage to fulfill that, and the pricing there? What is the number of campaigns that we created with our existing team without scaling inadvertently? And then the metrics there, of course, number of individual content pieces, cost of each individual piece, speed of production, and all of that. Build a measurement pyramid for that contribution goal. The key with all of this is to get out of our cubes and go look at beyond the dashboard. Because as my friend Vishal Khanna, who's the head of marketing at Health Prize Technology, says, not all value is delivered via web form or in Google Analytics. Sometimes we got to get out and go talk to the CFO, go talk to our VP of sales, go talk to the demand generation people, go talk to all of those people and understand what that value really is. So, okay, how do we actually get to goals? How do we actually get to those goals? Well, there's only two ways to get to goals. The two ways that we get to goals are, one, we can forecast. In other words, I can look at what my cost per lead is, or I can look at what my data is today that I know, and I can estimate the value of that tomorrow. In other words, I can look out and I can see that it's sunny today, so it's probably going to be sunny tomorrow. Now, I may be surprised and I may be wrong, but I can forecast based on that. Or I can backcast to a goal. In other words, I can say, here's what I need to be true in order for this investment to actually work. And then I can work backward from that goal to say, do I believe I can achieve this? That's where I can say, what do I need to define in order to be successful? It's the only two ways goals can be assigned. It's the way your CEO does it when they do monthly estimates for for Wall Street. It's how we actually get to the goals we're trying to achieve. So if we take that, we can start mapping those things out over time based on purposes that we emerge. So for example, we can do a value of our audience today. So just as a simple example, this is meant to just be illustrative. It's not meant to be specific in any way. We say, what's our audience worth today? Well, we have 8,500 subscribers, and the cost per visitor currently is $3. Now, you might argue a subscriber is worth more than a visitor. I would argue that, but let's be conservative. So it's a cost per visitor is $3. So a 10% conversion to visitor from our monthly email, in other words, as a visitor from that subscriber, well, we can just do the math. 10% is 850 times $3 times 12. That's a yearly value of $30,000. And you go, okay, that's nice. $30,000, it's not terribly meaningful. But wait for it, because now let's forecast out and look at 2021, where we add another goal. And we say, well, by the end of next year, we're going to have enough subscribers where we believe we can be 10% of the leads. Remember our $150,000 goal. So now we're going to grow the audience by 50% because we're going to have all year to get good programs to grow that audience. So we'll grow it to 12,750 and we'll add a goal. So not only will we do better with our audience value, but we'll do better with our lead value. So now our total audience value is $180,000. You see how that grows in a compound way? By the end of 22, we'll add two more goals, maybe decrease cost per lead. So we look at the delta there. And maybe we'll also start using all that first-party data to give us better media buy. So perhaps the audience value grows to $400,000 because we've grown it to 15,000 members. And so on and so forth to the end of 2023, where we say, look, we're now at 20,000 subscribers. The value of that audience is $800,000 to the business because it's delivering against 5 forecasted goals. Now, certainly, some of those will be wrong. Some of them will be high. Some of them will be low. But you can see what we're doing here. We're managing this immersive experience in the audience like a product. We're saying, forecast out over time. We believe we can build value over time. And in that investment asset becomes more valuable over time because it delivers against more business goals. That's the key of mapping these things out based on the goals we can assign. And of course, we have agile purposes and agile methodologies. And as some of these things turn out not to be true, as these forecasts become less aggressive, more aggressive because of our activities, we're going to be making adjustments to it as we go. And not everything will succeed. Certainly, sometimes we'll fail. But this is a way to start building a business plan that we can start to forecast profitability of our wonderful, wonderful platform. Because, yeah, in the early days, we have costs. We're going to have to build this platform. We're going to have to put content into it. We're going to have to hire. We're going to have to get an agency involved. And the costs are going to be higher. But over time, the value that it delivers will start to grow. And maybe by the sort of third quarter of 2021 is where we start to reach break even. And then after that, we really start achieving profitability because our costs are not going up nearly as fast as the value is. That's the way we measure these immersive experiences once we understand the goals and purpose. What we can do is we can answer all 3 questions. When we say, how much should we invest? Well, we ask ourselves, how much success do we need? And we can start forecasting out those goals. We can forecast them or backcast them. And then, based on the numbers that we need to measure and deliver success, we can say, in order to scale to that, this is what we're going to need. And that tells us how much we have to invest. And we can work circularly to say, all right, is this how much budget we have? This is how much success we can achieve. Is this how much scalability we're going to be able to achieve? Then we can deliver this much success. Now we can start to plug in the right numbers to deliver something that's realistically deliverable, but also that delivers the success the business is looking for. And we have the right order. In other words, we understand our goals and purpose because we understand our operating model. That's an important piece of this. Don't forget it. We can't skip that part. We need to understand what is our true purpose as a content team. That gives us the right way to do efficient scalability through the right team, the right processes, the right workflows, the right technologies. And then that gives us the ability to start focusing on these immersive experiences that build audiences and deliver against that purpose. So with that, I would love to tell you about this wonderful assessment that we and our friends at Content Stack, of course, have delivered. This is a self-assessment tool that can walk you through exactly what we went through today and help you assess and orient and balance your content marketing measurement strategy. And with all of that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sonia, who can actually help us think through all these wonderful things and facilitate some questions. And I thank you so very much for your time today. Hopefully we've got plenty of time here for some Q&A and talking about measurement. I know it's fun to talk about numbers and math.
It is actually. So thank you very much, Robert. This was actually really enlightening. I have a question right away for you that people didn't ask, but in those measurements that you showed, how do you advise your customers to handle the challenge of attribution when you have multiple?
Question. Yeah, and you know what? What I have done, and this is what I'm advising now. Take this with the giant grain of salt in which I present it. I've stopped worrying about attribution, and here's why.
Okay.
Because it's when we look at attribution, we tend to complicate it. And what I mean by that is that attribution can quickly become political. It can quickly become one of those things, emotional, where we either inadvertently start to throw out attribution based on, well, this content piece was really expensive, so of course it really is contributing a lot, versus sales guys taking their attribution, versus demand generation taking their attribution for first touch, versus last touch, versus all the things in the middle. Now, one of the things that I've often, so for just a quick story, I had a CFO tell me, hey, we started this thing called marketing, and they had done no marketing up until January of a year, and they spent a year building their marketing department, building content, building email campaigns, building ad campaigns. At the end of the year, they grew by 600%. And so the CFO said, I want to go back and I want to do a look back on every single thing we did. And so he had the head of every department, marketing, demand generation, sales, customer service, do an analysis. And based on all of their analysis, he estimated that they should have actually grown by 1,500% because everybody, of course, claimed responsibility for all of those things. And then they went back and looked at every individual ad campaign, every marketing campaign, and what they found also surprised them was that if you look at every ad campaign in its singularity, most of them did okay or were flat or actually lost money. But here's the thing. They grew at 600%. That was a fact. What happened? The key is that as I look at attribution, when we look at this, if I understand my purpose and my goals, and I understand the KPIs that are helping me address those goals. In other words, if my goal is to become 10% of the leads, I have to go have the human conversation with sales to say, are the leads I'm delivering you good through here? And be able to track them through that journey to be able to use data to prove in some form or fashion that they engaged with content. In other words, they were part of our audience before they became part of the sales lead process. Well, now I at least understand that they were part of that audience. Now, what tipped the scales? Was it the sales guy actually delivering them some amazing persuasive thing deep in the funnel? Or was it the decision factor of finding us in a search and associating our brand with trust because of this wonderful value we gave them in this blog post. I don't care. I don't care. Or I care, but I care a little. What I care more about is, did they engage with content? Are they part of our audience? Because overall, it's helping me meet a more integrated business goal, which is, and my agreement with the salesperson helps justify this, they became a lead. They were an audience member that became a lead. It helps me get better at my job. It helps him get better at his job, and it helps the business succeed. So maybe too simplistic, and I'm the first one to admit this may be too simplistic, but I kind of look at it the way I look at it with my marriage. If I can remember the day I met my wife and then my anniversary, everything else in between is kind of nice. Everything else is what makes me successful, those two things. So first touch, last touch, everything else in between is nice to have.
That makes a lot of sense. And I do like the human conversation, because I see many marketing folks very data obsessed, which is good.
Yes.
But sometimes lacking the conversation.
Yeah, scoring can be, lead scoring and attribution scoring is great. And if you can do it, I applaud you. I will stand up and give you a standing ovation if you can figure out the science behind that, and if you can get everybody to agree to it. My experience is that at that last part, getting everybody to agree to a common scoring platform really is problematic. So in the absence of that, I say, if you can get to that first and last touch, you're doing very well.
Excellent. So we have a lot of questions, right?
Sure.
Let me run through a few of those, and a few kind of come together. One interesting one is, running a successful content strategy, does it need to adhere to segmentation, or can you successfully pursue multiple audiences in one program?
You know, so that's an it depends question. And you know, it's one of those things where I know it's frustrating when the speaker goes, well, it depends. Here's what I'll say is that, and by segments, I'm going to use the word audiences or personas because I like that word better, but segments are cool with me. Ultimately, the best case scenario is one platform or one experience per audience. And how you define that, in many cases, what I find companies doing is, quite frankly, doing persona development or audience development, and they're looking for the differences and trying to think about the differences rather than looking for the commonalities. And that's my first piece of advice, is when you're looking at audiences and personas, look for the commonalities so that you reduce the number of personas that you have to develop for. So, you know, whether that's buying intent, whether that's you know, awareness of brand, whether that's, you know, use case, whether, you know, whatever those things are, look for those commonalities. Having said that, in the best case scenario, yeah, you've got one experience per audience. Now, there are plenty of exceptions to that. I know a financial services company that has one blog, but what they do is they segment 3 different channels of that blog, 3 tabs from the first time you get there, into 3 different personas. So they're, you know, CMO, CFO, you know, sort of, you know, engineering kind of, you know, at those kind of personas. And so whether you do it on, you know, so it's specific content to specific audiences, and then how you creatively decide to present that information is different. But ideally, one platform per audience, because that helps you develop content that is specifically valuable to that audience. And you help them you know, and you can help better understand how you're doing with that audience. I'll give you a specific example of this, is we worked with a cybersecurity company, it was a software company. And one of the things that they did was they separated their blog into 3 separate blogs, which was one devoted to like consumers and journalists, you know, consumer-oriented people concerned about cybersecurity. 2, sort of what does it mean for your business? So for CEOs and CFOs and CTOs, so that we're concerned about business strategy and cybersecurity. And then 3, for the geeks, right? For the coders, for the people who are actually getting into the back end of things and working with cybersecurity. By doing that and starting to associate data and consumption with those audiences, they started to understand where their buyers actually were. You know, who their buyers were. And they were actually surprised because most of their customers were not coming from the CEO, CTO, et cetera, but rather the geeks, the coders. And so that helped them optimize content in the sales channel, a contribution goal, as they started to optimize the contribution goal toward optimizing the sales channels, the emails for sales, et cetera. They started focusing on much more tactical things about cybersecurity rather than the sort of more strategic, because what they were finding is that the businesses, the CTOs and CEOs, were basically handing off to their engineering colleagues to say, go figure out which one was the best. So that gave them a very clear handoff from a content perspective on how to optimize their sales channel. That can be one way to start to think about how you segment across channels to understand what each audience really cares about.
That makes sense. That was a lot. So I've got a few more questions. There's actually 4 questions around what technology do you need to make this work? And actually there's one longer question, so I'll expand on this. For running and building a persona-based custom content hub from marketing resources, blog posts, webinar, case studies, and so on.
I didn't hear the last part of that question.
Sorry. Any software technology best practices for building buyer persona custom content hubs from marketing resources like blog posts, webinars, case studies?
Yes, of course. Well, I mean, here comes the softball sort of floating over the home plate, right? So notwithstanding ourselves sitting here together, these sort of obvious things literally staring us in the face at the moment. Great, so we look at the technology stack for these kinds of programs as threefold. One is a very collaborative and very, quite frankly, agile ability to create these owned media experiences as fast as possible. I've said before, and I'll say it again, today's owned media strategy needs to be as agile and quick as today's paid media strategy. In other words, it needs to be just as fast for us to launch a blog or a resource center, and quite frankly, fold them up as well, launch and decommission these properties as easy as it is to launch an ad campaign or a banner campaign, et cetera. In many cases, it is just too hard. It should not be hard for us to launch a new owned media platform because, quite frankly, we need to be able to test these things. We need to be able to launch them quickly so that we can not have to basically reinvent the wheel every time we want to try and do this, because we won't succeed in all of these things. And if we understand how we're doing quickly in building audiences, engaging audiences, well, now we can commission, scale, or decommission them as necessary. The second piece of that is really important, which is being able to track audience engagement and subscriptions underneath all of those experiences as a common thread. Too many times what I see are audiences developed in blog systems that, quite frankly, don't talk to the resource center that's being managed in some other system, that doesn't talk to the CRM system, that doesn't talk in another part of the organization. So we have no way of basically communicating or understanding that attribution challenge, because a blog subscriber is often some separate database, and the lead database is separate, and the CRM database is separate. And yeah, maybe we can get IT to do some big data dump and start to marry that stuff up in some Excel magic, but it's really, really difficult. Connecting those things so that we start building that, and I know it's a bit of a trite description, that 360-degree view of the customer as we meet them. They become audiences, they become subscribed audiences, they become leads, qualified leads, customers, and loyal customers. That's the real key, is treating audiences as we would customers with the same care and feeding and data management that we would. Those two things together, and then coupled with the third tier, which is a great measurement capability, analytics, KPI measurements, et cetera, for all the different activities we're doing, is that's for us the critical content stack.
The critical content stack.
Yeah, well, I did not just invent that term. Just so you. So don't. That's not. It's not the. It's not the CCS, right? So I did not just invent the CCS. It is just what we think of as important components of your technology. Put it that way.
Fantastic. Although, if you need order forms, guys, email me at information@contentstack.com and we'll sort that. Yeah. We have a lot of questions still. And guys, we're not going to get through all of them. We are already running over. Robert, can we still answer 2? Is that okay?
I'm absolutely fine to answer questions. Yes, I'm literally at home. So
wonderful. That's excellent. Thank you very much. So Karen asks, great insights first. Thank you, Karen. I bet you guys are all thinking that this needs a lot of time and intentional planning. Do you have any recommendations, Robert, on how to gain support when you are operating in the more is more culture?
Boy, it's a great question. I mean, it's the question, quite frankly, that was better answered, I think, in Tim's presentation about understanding our operating model, because that's really where we build the business case for this. But all 3 are important in terms of being able to convince the bosses that this is worth doing. One of the things that I think is really important is, one, looking at it in that longer term view, sort of being able to, not just say, hey, I want to build a blog because it's important, but hey, I want to build a blog because I think it can deliver these kinds of goals and this kind of value. That's an important piece. So use what is included in all 3 of these webinars as a means of sort of structuring a business case for what it is you want to do. The second piece of that, quite frankly, is starting with just getting your arms around cost, which is always, and especially right now, which is a great one. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and this is something you can tweet or quote or whatever, which is 90% of content strategy has nothing to do with content. It is everything to do with communication and how we actually facilitate better communication in the business. So getting our arms around what we're doing and communicating that throughout the business can be something very easy and early you can do to help build that. In other words, one of the hardest things to do is to say, hey, listen, we want better processes and better governance and better, abilities to think through what we're doing with content so that we speak in a more consistent tone and so that we actually drive better results and all of that. And all of that seems really nice, but it's really hard to sort of pin your, finger on, say, this is the value it provides. The place to initially provide a finger of value to say, here's where we can drive value immediately is in that cost. Literally just getting to a common nomenclature. I told that example before about the CFO that I spoke with about content costs, and that's a true story. It's a client we worked with where they were global in nature, siloed in nature, and quite frankly, what they were spending on ebooks was way different than what they were spending on what they called white papers or articles in the UK, right? So, what is an ebook? What is an article? What is a white paper? What is a blog post? What is a project versus an initiative? What is an initiative versus a campaign versus a project? Even just getting a standard or a protocol around the way content is created, managed, and quite frankly, what it's called and how we're spending money on it can find millions in some cases of dollars of savings. Just getting our arms around creating content in a smarter way rather than sort of always chasing our tails and this on-demand sort of idea. So many times I talk to content teams and they tell me their content calendar is just a to-do list of all the stuff that they have to do. It's not really a strategic calendar. We can stop that madness and convince the management that if we can shift that balance to something more proactive, where we're measuring twice, we're creating the right processes before we actually create any content, well, now we'll do it in a much smarter way. Classic example of this is we create the customer story. So we go out, we send a team, we get a video of that customer saying nice things about us and saying nice things about their experience with us, and we go back. And then the product people go, well, it would have been real nice if we had been known about that. We would have had this customer do an interview of them working with the product. And then the marketing people go, hey, it would have been really great if we could have actually gotten some audio for our podcast in an interview. And then the other people go, hey, it would have been really great if we got some photographs of the customer, and so on and so forth. Thinking all those things through before we actually do the content helps us not only save money, which is that early point, but can also help us leverage and reuse content as components all the way through that buyer's journey. It just makes things better. So measuring twice and cutting once can be a huge benefit. And then, of course, focusing on cost first can be your sort of leg up, if you will.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, we are running to the top of the hour, so you need to answer like within a minute now, Robert.
Oh, sorry. I tend to be verbose. You know this about me.
So I do. So I'm chuckling away here. How do you start to build the data to track audiences all the way through the journey so that you can give them different goals?
Yeah. So I'll answer this very quickly. One is have the right technology to be able to do that, right? But even before you acquire the right technology, understand the data that you need. One of my favorite quotes, and I'm forgetting exactly, I think it's Eli Goldratt, who basically says, we often start with, we start with answers instead of questions. In other words, let's figure out the right questions that we want to answer with the data, and that will tell us which data we need to answer those questions before we actually go out and start assembling it. So we have to understand our purpose and our goals first. That will tell us the data we need. Then we need the right technology to be able to acquire it and manage it and use it.
That was very short. That feels like we might need another webinar, Robert. No. Seriously, Robert, this was super insightful. I took notes over here too. It's been really, really good to hear your insights again. Thank you to all of you attendees for all the nice words in the chat. We will share those with Robert afterwards. Thank you for being such an active crowd and asking so many questions. The ones we didn't get to, we'll answer in a follow-up email. But Robert, this was absolutely fantastic. And I hope you have some fun too with it.
I always do. This, as you know, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So thank you so much for having me, and thank all of you.
Such a pleasure. Now, guys, we're going to send you the details in our follow-up for the recording, and many of you asked about webinar 1 and 2. We'll send you the links and the worksheets as well. If you haven't downloaded the hands-on worksheet for this webinar yet, go do so. It's really going to help you to define your goals and your metrics and help you articulate the value of your programs internally as well. And with that, thank you again for joining. Thanks for taking the time to do so live today. Have a great night or a great day wherever you are, and do stay safe. Goodbye from Content Stack.